the Delmarva Almanac. Each week we connect you to the best of Delmarva. Like other almanacs, our aim is to tell you a little bit about our past, our present, and events in the near future. I'm your host, Dana Kester McCabe. The commercial oyster harvest season closes this week. The oyster has played a very important part in Delmarva's heritage. There are quite a few stories we could tell about the tasty bivalve. We will save for another time the story of the oyster wars between local watermen, or the story of those stalwarts who preserve our beloved fleet of oyster dredging skipjacks and their way of life. This time we'll hear from Charlie Pertocci, an historian and former game warden who lectures about our seafood heritage and has organized a local seafood festival or two. I asked him to tell me about our seafood heritage here on Delmarva and America's love affair with the oyster.
So fishing heritage has roots in tourism. I mean, even if you look back, the beginning of tourism on the Eastern Shore started post-Civil War. You know, and a lot of it came out of the misery and loss of the Civil War. There were certain things that happened in the late 1860s, early 1870s. Cities became crowded. Alcoholism became a way of life for a lot of people. Tuberculosis was on the rise. And so people wanted out. They wanted to escape. And this is where you saw towns like Atlantic City, New Jersey, Ocean City, Maryland, and so on and so forth began to give rise to tourism, vacationers, you know, people coming down to spend time on the beaches. And the men who fought in that war, the camaraderie that was established, they began to form hunt clubs, to come together as a group, and not so much because of the hunting, the weapons and things like this, but it was a chance for them to get away and be who they were when, say, they had served their time in the Army. And so this was also part of a vacation in tourism development as well. And so, you know, we saw this rise of recreation, which was hunting and fishing as part of people coming out of cities. You know, you see the old photographs of people on the beaches, and whether it's in vacationing in hotels on Wallops Island or Wachapreague, or certainly up in Ocean City and Fenwick, where you have you know, folks holding up fish, long stringers of trout, you know, red drum and black drum. And obviously that was part of their vacation, where things like the beach swimming was not, getting tan lines was not so much of an important issue. So fishing heritage here has its roots that go back, you know, 150 years. And it has developed slowly in the 1920s. You started seeing the rise of sport fishing taking place, the cities growing in population, ethnic groups coming in, again, post-Civil War, and they brought a lot of their desires in culinary areas, and so they were looking for those fish they enjoyed, say, around the Mediterranean, along the coast of Ireland and in Holland and whatever, and so America had great opportunity for seafood development, and so those paralleled as well with tourism and also the rise of culture in America. So fishing in this area, both commercial and sport fishing, I think were important, you know, for cultural development and also economic development.
You're listening to the Delmarva Almanac. I'm Dana Kester McCabe, and Charlie Pertocci is telling us about how the oyster became so popular.
You know, after the Civil War, this tremendous love affair arose, and we could not get enough oysters in this country. And oyster houses opened up everywhere. You know, Chicago and San Francisco and New York, and you saw pictures of miners out in Arizona and the Dakotas, and these rough-honed men with pickaxes and shovels, behind them a mound of oyster shells. Like, how the hell did they get oysters out here? Well, it was the trend. You know, it was a sign of wealth, status in many cases to eat oysters, but also it was the food of the common man. Just like hot dog stands in New York, you'd belly up to the stand on the street where they're roasting oysters or shucking them raw, and they're a penny a piece or two for a penny, nickel beers. And, you know, we just couldn't satiate the market. And this is part of the demise of the oyster in the beginning. And New York City, for example, had over 1,000 oyster houses. 1,000, that's a lot. Today there's only one left. It's called the Oyster House, and it's in Grand Central Station. And it's still there. It's from, I believe, 1886. So, you know, the oysters have been an iconic species product, a seafood product for Americans for a long time.
There are folks who can taste the difference between a Pacific or Olympia oyster from the American West Coast or an East Coast Maine pemaquid. Charlie says it's all about the water.
I think here in the Eastern Shore, our claim to fame is the salt oyster. And that term is derived from the fact that oysters are one of those species that could tolerate huge swings in salinity. So you find oysters along the coastal corridor in the back coastal bays, certainly, with high salinity, but you also find them far up to Chesapeake Bay, Rock Hall and above. So they have evolved to tolerate big swings in salinity. But because, again, the seafood is only as good as the water comes from, also the water imparts flavor as well. So coastal oysters, high salinity, are going to be saltier than oysters, saying, coming far up the bay or the Gulf of Mexico during the rainy season. And that will dictate price. That'll command a higher price, your saltier oysters. So Chincoteague salts became famous at one time, though the oysters were harvested up and down the coast and sold as Chincoteague salts, and they were still saltwater oysters. The famous blue points of Long Island are another oyster, all the same animal, Virginicus, but because of where they came from, the marketing that they did, commanded a higher price.
The commercial oyster harvest season this year began in October and ends at the end of April. It is closely regulated because of declining populations of the tasty mollusk due to overharvesting and the fluctuating health of the bays where they live. Writer Jonathan Swift is quoted as musing, "He was a bold man that first ate an oyster." Charlie Pertocci says that he can think of up to 15 ways to eat oysters, with variations on raw, steamed, roasted, fried, or stewed. Until next fall, oyster lovers like you and me will just have to make do with clams. We'd like to thank our community partners, the Friends of Delmarva Public Radio, the Community Foundation of the Eastern Shore, and underwriters EatDrinkBuyArt.com for their help in bringing this program to you, our audience. Our theme music was provided by Brightside Studio. This show has been a Moonshell production. Thanks for listening. Until we meet again, may the rhythms and tides of Delmarva bring you good fortune.